Hello, welcome back to part two of our lecture on Emily Dickinson. I'm going to start with just a brief recap of where I was at in part one, just as a reminder, because again, these are some of the themes that we'll be looking for as we work through these three poems from Emily Dickinson. And again, what I'm really stressing here is that merger between romanticism and realism, because she does kind of bridge both. Glorification of nature. Remember, we're going to be looking for, she specifically looks at nature and her relationship with the natural world in her poems. Spirituality, that's going to be her romanticism at play. The fact that the poems can be emotional. Imaginative, that's again a characteristic of romanticism. And personification, how she uses the I of the poem, and or how she personifies certain abstract concepts. Realism, focus on everyday life, the mundane, realistic settings. Imagery, again specifically building the entire poem around a single image. That's going to be very much a characteristic of realism that we'll see in her work. And then, also social commentary. Dickinson tends not to be explicit with her social commentary, but it's still there. All right, so let's dive into the first poem from her. Let's see if I can get this to cooperate as usual. All right, and hopefully my camera is not blurring your vision of the poem. They insist on us keeping our cameras on when we record videos for our classes. I would just as soon not, but that's what they want us to do. So, but anyway, the first poem that we're going to look at from her, that's on in your Norton text, that's on page 648. And it is poem titled 258. There's a certain slant of light. There's a certain slant of light on winter afternoons that oppresses like the weight of cathedral tunes. Heavenly hurt it gives us, we can find no scar, but internal difference where the meanings are. None may teach it, any. 'Tis the sealed despair, an imperial affliction, sent us of the air. When it comes, the landscape listens, shadows hold their breath. When it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death. So looking at that first stanza there, now already we're seeing what? Glorification of nature. She's talking about something that she's observing in the natural world. That certain slant of light, she says. She's also using simile there, which, as you may recall, what is that? That's a comparison that uses like or as. She's comparing this sight of the winter light on a winter afternoon to cathedral tunes that you might hear, in a, I don't know, I'm thinking of these old spooky Gothic cathedrals, right? The music's going to sound very dirge-like. It's going to be heavy. It's going to be oppressive. Let's look at this next image here. Now I'm going to jump back to the poem. But let's look at this image here, because this is exactly what Emily Dickinson is talking about in this poem. It's wintertime. She's observing a late afternoon sun. You know that in wintertime, there's a certain phenomenon about this that we've all experienced this. In wintertime, the sun can still shine, but it doesn't give off any warmth or very little warmth. It can be a blistering cold day. It's one of those type days you can look out the window and it looks like it might be very pleasant and warm outside. But then when you actually go out into it, it's going to be bitter cold. And that sun is it's almost like a false sense of warmth. It's there, but it's not there, and it's not really giving off any warmth to it. Also, we know in wintertime the days are short, the nights are very long, and they come on early. So by late afternoon, the sun is already pretty low in the sky. This starts as early as 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that we already start to see that slant in the sun. And the sun in wintertime is not very bright or strong, even at high noon. But by the time, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, by the time late afternoon rolls around, it's already on the wane. And the shadows, are getting longer that time of day. And this feeling is very oppressive to her. That's the state of mind for this poem. Emily Dickinson, I'm sure most scholars agree, she was very eccentric. She spent most of her life writing from the confines of her home. Very rarely, in fact, even left her room. I'm sure she suffered with depression. That has to be a given. And her poems tend to express this feeling of oppression that she called the oppression of the mind. And that's it's reflecting that internal state for her. But she's observing things that she sees from the outside world and making those connections to the subtext beneath. How do those things relate to what she's feeling? All right, let's see if we can jump back into the poem here. So she describes that sight as a heavenly hurt. It's a hurt because it is false. It's promising warmth, but it's not giving warmth. And she says we can find no scar, but internal difference where the meanings are. None may teach it anything, 'tis the seal, despair, and imperial affliction sent us of the air. And this is not a happy poem, but it does smack of romanticism, right? If you think back to Baudelaire, all right, and some of the things that Baudelaire was writing. And he talked about his ennui, as he called it, and his boredom and his listlessness and his despair. This is more of that in the same vein. And then she goes on in that last stanza, she describes it as when it comes, this wan light, she calls it. The landscape listens. Shadows hold their breath, but it's fleeting, right? It's going to be gone almost as soon as it appears. And then it's only going to leave that long shadow behind, which is that long winter night coming on. Now, I do think in this poem, I heard a fly buzz when I died. This is one of her very famous works. And it's a pretty straightforward poem. It's told from the persona, and again, here's the personification, right? So we've got this I speaker who is also personifying this tiny creature, the fly, that she is witnessing in her hour of death. So she's literally putting herself in the position of that she's the person on her deathbed who is dying, and she's observing really just sort of the minute, the mundane things that are around her. Again, this poem, I think, leans heavier towards realism. All right, let's just read through it, and then we'll kind of break it down a little bit. I heard a fly buzz when I died. The stillness in the room was like the stillness in the air between the heaves of storm. The eyes around had wrung them dry, and breaths were gathering firm for that last onset when the king be witnessed in the room. I willed my keepsakes, signed away what portion of me be assignable, and then it was there interposed a fly, with blue, uncertain, stumbling buzz between the light and me. And when the windows failed, and then I could not see to see. It's a very strange little poem, right? But really not that hard to understand. So this is a person who is dying, and literally she's describing what might go through the mind of a dying person in those last minutes of life. What does the dying brain focus on? What does the dying eye see? And how are they internalizing those final thoughts? And she seems to be making the argument that in the end, none of our grand accomplishments are going to matter very much. In fact, the persona here of this poem seems quite modest in what she's accomplished in her life. I willed my keepsakes, signed away what portion of me be assignable. That's kind of referencing that idea of signing a will, right? You've willed off your possessions. She describes the vigil. The relatives are gathering around the bed. That's what she means by the eyes around had wrung them dry, and breaths were gathering firm for that last onset. But she, the person dying in the bed, is being drawn to something else. Now she's being drawn literally and figuratively, to that window which is letting in the light from outside. Because she's going into the place of darkness. But she's focusing on, kind of wanting her last view of life to be that light. But it's a view that's marred because there's this tiny little creature who has interposed himself and has come to rest on the window, and he's buzzing, and that sound is so loud and magnified in her ears. It's like it's the only thing she can hear or be conscious of, and she's kind of thinking, there's a part of her that's kind of like, isn't this silly? Now, isn't this silly that I should be lying here dying, and this is the last thing I'm hearing, and this is the last thing that I'm going to be conscious of? And is this what my entire life has amounted to? That it's reduced to this. That the last thing I'm going to be aware of in this life is a dead burn fly. You talk about a celebration of the mundane. Now, in a way, it's also a glorification of nature. She's witnessing something of nature, but she's treating it in that sense of, there's not really wonder and awe here. is kind of trivializing